the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today we're flying across the country to Virginia Beach to talk to professional astrologer Kathy Rose. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. It is so nice to meet you.
Yeah, this is our first encounter, so it's live on air. Well, maybe not live, but being recorded.
I know of you, just haven't met you. Yes.
Yeah. And I've seen you. You have a very amazing YouTube channel with forecasts and even your own Maverick Podcast. So you've been in the biz for 4 decades plus, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I love that. Oh, so I really would love to know what your first astrology book was.
Well, I started very young. I had an art teacher in 3rd grade who started to talk about astrology. I don't recall the context. But she was doing the astrology glyphs. And I remember my whole being just lit up. And I started to bug my mother for an astrology book. And it just coincided with when Linda Goodman published Sun Signs. And bless my mom, because she was just an ordinary kind of blue collar, we lived in a small little town. And she got me the book, Linda Goodman's Sun Sign, and I sat on the front steps, and I vividly recall turning the pages and reading and having this sensation that I was remembering the information. So I ran inside and went, "Mom, this amazing thing is happening. I'm reading it and remembering it." And she went, "Go outside and play."
I'm not ready to hear about your past life as an astrologer.
Right. I have nothing to say. Just go do something. I don't care what it is.
Wow.
But that was my first book, and it launched me. And I kept that. I don't know where the book went. I lost it somewhere along the line, but I remember taking it to school. And at the back of each chapter of each sign, I would walk around on the playground with a little pencil, and I would watch my schoolmates and go, "When's your birthday?" And I would write their name at the end of the chapter, and then I would observe them and write things in there. And, of course, I got labeled as very weird, but that's okay.
I think astrologers like being the weirdos, though.
You have to get used to it. That's for sure.
So you were doing astrological research in elementary school?
In elementary school, and it never stopped.
Oh, that's so cool.
And then I started studying on my own, reading any book I could ever get my hands on. And I don't even recall what they all are. But again and again and again, what would happen is I would get information, then I would read it in the book and go, whoa, things would come back to me. It was a really interesting way to learn astrology, or to relearn. I don't know.
Yeah. Have you done any work with past life regression?
Oh, yeah. In fact, I do past life therapeutic sessions on people. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Your past self is helping your now and future self.
That's right. That's right.
Very, very lovely. Mm-hmm. So if you were going to take 3 books with you to a deserted island, which would be the 3 that are going to make it into your luggage?
You know what was interesting when I think about that? My first response is, I would take a survival kit to a deserted island. I wouldn't take an astrology book. But that's just because I'm rebellious. That's right. But if I did, my first and most important one would be a book by Noel Tyl, Synthesis and Counseling in Astrology. It's only 900 pages, so it weighs a ton. Interestingly enough, I was in practice for 20 plus years before I met Noel. And I decided to sign up for his course because I didn't have an astrological community. I really didn't have a network of friends in astrology. I wasn't going to the conferences. I was busy doing consults all the time, trying to make a living. And I decided to sign up for his course. And as part of his very powerful master's correspondence course, you had reading assignments from that book. But I was able to do his course without reading anything in his book. So I really haven't fully read the book. I graduated from the course. I ended up working with Noel as his assistant.
Yeah.
I ended up teaching his course. I still haven't read this 900-page book. I've read sections.
I've got the pink copy. You just hold up the black version. I have a pink one here.
Yes, one of the earlier ones. Well, I have a pink copy too.
Yeah.
Hold on to it because they are not in print anymore and people are price gouging. And the book, I just think, is so powerful.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to keep busy on this deserted place. And a 900-page book is going to be very, very helpful for that. This one also helps. I mean, there's a lot of gems in here, it seems,
Very much. And in the back, it has a quick glance transit tables, which I cut out of the book. It's a sacred book. And I know people say you cut pages out of a book. Yes, I did. And I staple them together. And a lot of the students have and use it because you can look very quickly if somebody says, yeah, in 1956, this is what happened to me. And you can just glance in there and see where the planets were at that time very quickly. And it also has this spectacular section for midpoints and solar arcs, which is brilliant. It's just absolutely brilliant on a high level.
Yes, it's very amazing that he somehow convinced the Ebertins to basically distill the combination of stellar influences into this book, because you don't need to have that one if you have this one.
Well, Reinhold Ebertin was a bit negative, a bit dark, a bit negative interpretation, heavy interpretation. Maybe that's a better way. And Noel took it to more of a humanistic, therapeutic level, a more psychological level, which I appreciated. I do have Ebertin's book, but it's scary. Half of the interpretations in there are dire and negative and scary, and that's not my approach.
Yeah, it's very German in that way.
Very fatalistic, too.
Yeah. The humanistic angle, can you distill for people who aren't as aware? Because I feel like I entered astrology through Alan Oken, so I was already sort of born and raised kind of in a humanistic milieu in the 90s. But I think that's gotten lost in this, the resurgence of the traditional techniques in the Hellenistic revival. So can you kind of give us a sense of what the flavor of humanistic astrology is like?
Yeah, and I call myself a modern therapeutic humanistic astrologer. If I were to classify myself, that's what I would say. The humanistic approach is, in my mind, in my interpretation, would be, first of all, you don't leave the human out of the horoscope. The horoscope is a piece of paper. The horoscope is an imprint of the planets at the time of birth, but it's a launching pad. It is not, I always say, I am not my chart. I am a soul who has a temporary imprint from the planets at the time of birth. I'm a soul who has a chart. I'm a soul who's had many charts because many lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of the humanistic approach. But I think the humanistic approach kind of embodies the psychological part. That we are not influenced by the planets, we use the planetary forces. So in other words, planets don't do things to us. We do things, we engage these patterns, and it's not so much event-oriented. It's not, this planet transiting your chart or arcing to your chart will cause this to happen. And it's not even really the orientation of looking at the horoscope and saying, oh God, Saturn's on his sun, this will happen. It's more, how are you going to use that energy? How will you develop? What opportunity does this offer for you to learn? And an event may happen. So it's different in that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really appreciate that reminder of the developmental process, and that it sounds like when we're saying humanistic astrology, it's more than just what gets called psychological astrology. It's got a different dimension to it.
Exactly, because in the end, I very much embody free will. But, that's why I have a podcast called the Maverick Podcast. This is not a shameless plug for the podcast. It is because I am absolutely a maverick, and I question rules. I question tradition. I always ask why? Is there a better way?
You graduate from Noel's class without reading his 900-page textbook.
I never told him that.
And admit that in public. Oh my gosh.
Well, he's listening, I'm sure, but
Yeah. Oh, he's such a smart Capricorn, dying on the day he was born. I mean, what a nice little bookend in life.
At 11 a.m.
Wow, even better.
And I was the first one to find out because one of my friends, who is one of the graduates of the course, was there. And she stepped out of the room and said, he just passed. And what was amazing is Noel's daughter didn't even know he was in hospice.
Oh, no.
And I never met his daughter. And as soon as I got the call that he had passed, all of a sudden, his spirit kind of came into my room and said with his big booming voice, because Noel and I were very close friends. And he said, "My daughter doesn't know. You need to tell her," with that big authority voice he has. And I went, oh my God, I don't know this woman. I don't even know how to get in touch with her. Now his spirit just told me I have to tell her her father died. I found her. I told her, but it was profound.
Phenomenal.
Yeah. And so I'm grateful to have known him, grateful to have worked with him. He and I thought a lot alike about simplicity in astrology, that I think the power of astrology is simplicity. What is the loudest statement? You know, his famous thing he would say is, how many measurements do you need? And I agree with that.
So that's permission, everyone, when you're listening to this, to keep it simple and, get into this synthesis and counseling book and figure out, how many measurements does it take to get into the chart and help.
Exactly, because they reinforce each other. They end up saying the same thing over and over and over. And by the time somebody who is measurement heavy has finished measuring, I'll be done with the consultation.
Keep it simple.
Yeah.
Wow. I love that. And I had a question about, in this moment when you're saying that he's redoing the combination of stellar influences and getting some of the more negative fatalistic elements out of the midpoint analysis. And I remember him saying while he was still here at an ISAR conference in 2014, he was lamenting the rise of malefic being used again as a term.
Yeah. Being mindful of accepting there are many ways to approach astrology. Being mindful there are many lenses through which we look at astrology. Okay. And honestly, from my heart, it's all good. However, I don't really embrace malefic. I don't also embrace benefic. I think it's all good. I think it's energy. I think it's all frequency. Now, I'm also very rebellious, and we could look at my chart, and my chart lacks dignity. If you look at it from a traditional or Hellenistic way, my chart sucks. I shouldn't have any success at all. I mean, it would be a very negative interpretation, and I have received negative interpretations. And I'm going through some very strong transits right now that some people would say, oh my God, be careful.
Yeah, just go hide for a while.
Yeah. I mean, and I had just had surgery a month ago against advice from multiple astrologers who said, don't do it. It's negative. It's bad right now. It's dangerous. It's like, no, I had to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't particularly embrace the concept of malefic. It's okay if other people do.
Yeah. I think it's a trend, as we go back and forth. I believe, I want to make a little prediction. I think it's been coming up in my conversations on this show, though. I do think that the books from the humanistic time are going to make a recurrence. I think they're going to become popular again.
Pluto's in Aquarius. I mean, there you go, right?
Yeah.
But the biggest difference, I think, between Hellenistic and traditional and humanistic is that humanistic doesn't have what I would call rules, hardcore rules. And, this is why I steer away from electional astrology. It's why I steer away from horary. Now they're valid. They're wonderful. Okay. I know how to do it, but I steer away from it because there are rules. If this placement, then that. And it's like, I challenge, I've been like that my whole life. I challenge. It's like, watch me have surgery and be just fine.
Yeah.
Tell me it's dangerous and I might die or it's a very negative time. Watch me. I'll bless it. I'll affirm. I'll engage all my friends. They'll affirm for me. And I sailed through it.
Well, congratulations for that. And I hope that your healing continues to be blessed.
Thank you.
Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support CAELi before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the CAELi Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.caeli.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support CAELi into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show. What would your second book be on this trip?
Maybe another one of Noel's, maybe a Stephen Arroyo book. But if I had to pick another one of Noel's, it would be The Creative Astrologer.
It's the one with a nice butterfly coming out of this.
That's right.
Man with a chart on his face.
Very good. The tagline at the bottom, effective single session counseling. I've done some lectures where I talk about single session counseling and how powerful it is and how that can guide us in a consultation. And it is very powerful. Now, I've had a lot of the same clients for the 42 years I've been doing astrology. They come back sometimes every year, sometimes as needed, because the session is not just, hey, I'm going to read your chart. It is, no, we're going to talk about development. And the goal, single session counseling or therapy, is to leave the person in better shape and to guide them and to educate them and inform them on these cycles so that they can go kick ass.
Yeah, I love that. And also for the people who don't want to necessarily have recurring clients, it's like, how can you do the best good in this session and then just keep moving on and getting more people help?
To empower them, not to just make them feel good, but to empower them.
Yeah. Well, this book came in handy. I had a first marriage, and there was a page in the Creative Astrologer about few people are willing to risk the temporary insecurity to affect change. And I printed that out. I photocopied it actually in my German department photocopy machine, and I circled it in red and I stuck it up on my art studio wall, and I just stared at it until the divorce was final. And it just gave me so much energy to read that, because it was exactly what was happening. It felt like the whole world was coming apart, and it was like, no, but I do like risk, and I'm good at that, and I'm going to do this well, and it's going to be awesome. And so that is actually one of my favorite pieces of advice in any astrology book, and it happens to come from this one. So thank you for reminding me of that.
That's beautiful. That is really beautiful. And, Noel was a word meister. He really was. He was a gifted writer and a gifted communicator. I mean, he had a gigantic ego and all that stuff, but he was truly gifted in putting words together and concepts beautifully and poetically sometimes too.
What's your favorite part of this book?
The Creative Astrologer?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. That is a book I've read more than the Synthesis and Counseling. And part of it is because he also gives examples of consultations. I don't know if I have a favorite part of the book. I should have prepared for that. But, what I loved about meeting Noel is that Noel did something that was risky in that he came up with new theories and new concepts. He advanced astrology. And now he and I talked about this quite often, in that, why is astrology stuck in just ancient principle and ancient ideas? As we evolve as a culture, as we evolve as humans, maybe astrology maybe new ideas can come through. Maybe we can receive them. I mean, I have a few theories I have come up with. In fact, my first article with the Mountain Astrologer was on one of those. It was a shorter article, but we are capable of receiving our own insights. And Noel did that with the Saturn retrograde phenomenology. He did that with his concept of psychological grand trine concept. He did that with his concepts of unaspected planets, which he called peregrine planets, and made all the traditional astrologers mad because he used a term he shouldn't have used. But he received a lot of arrows for that. As a pioneer, when you come up with new ideas, when you do something mavericky, you do tend to receive arrows because you're challenging the way everybody's thinking. But he did that consistently. We talked about that a lot. And in fact, one of the things he said to me when he started to become ill, and, he handed his course over to me, and he handed over the big conferences we used to do. He said, please remember to teach people and remember yourself to continue developing new theories in astrology. It should not stagnate. It's alive. It's an art form. Keep it moving forward.
I would love to hear about the contributions you're making that are coming through your mind sometime. So maybe not when we're talking about books, but that is something I didn't know that about you. And I really love that you're doing that work, because I see myself also engaging with that. I don't know if you're aware, but I thought about the hypothetical planets of the Witte and the Hamburg School tradition. And I said, well, why don't I make up hypothetical asteroids? And so
yes. Oh, I love
it just
that.
became a kind of exercise in paying attention to the quality of a moment. And when there would be a kind of inside joke, or like the conversation would have a certain energy or feeling, it'd be like, what's rising right now? And we would look at the degree on the ascendant, and something would happen. And it would just be about paying attention to the symbolism happening in the moment. And that became a really neat way of participating with the astrology of the moment.
Yes. And understanding the frequency of that energy.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I have about 5 or 10 books in me that need to be written. And I've been wanting to write these books forever and ever. But, I have a really busy consulting practice. I mean, I talk to clients every single day. Well, at least 6 days a week. And Frank Clifford recently said to somebody, and it struck me, that you can end up with Mercury fatigue.
Oh.
And I thought, whoa. I don't really have Mercury fatigue, but I don't have anything left over at the end of the day to write the books. Right. And we'll see. Someday, maybe I will write these concepts.
You have to schedule your books like they're a client.
Yes.
Book number 1 is this hour. Book number 2 is this hour. And just every hour, just dictate, let auto AI transcribe it, and then it'll write itself.
Yes.
I always love finding ways to get books out of people. I'm like, oh, now you told me there's 5 to 10 books in there. I've got to get them.
That's right. Problem solver.
That's my magic medicine for the world. It's like getting the books on the planet. So what would third book be that you would take with you?
Interestingly, Stephen Arroyo is somebody that even in late 70s, early 80s, when his books started to come out and I was reading them, I started my practice in 83, but even before the practice, he would be one where I would read something in his book and go, oh, I was just saying that myself, almost word for word. Now, I've never met Stephen. I've always wanted to, because I think we would resonate, at least his concepts in his books, like they were already in my head. The most recent book he came out with that I didn't even know he came out with this is Experiments and Experience with Astrology. So I just got this one not long ago. I also love the astrology, karma, and transformation. But in this most recent one, Experiments and Experience in Astrology, I tromped around the house going, oh my God, it's happening again. He's saying word for word what I've said in so many lectures. And I have the proof because it's on PowerPoint, And the same with Dane Rudger, except for, I love Dane Rudger, except I wish he would have just gotten to the point and said what he needed to say instead of pontificating. It's like I don't have the patience to go through all the words to get to the point.
Yeah.
But I love his concepts.
That's awesome. And it's wild to think, like, I feel like the more I'm engaging with people who are doing their own innovative work with astrology, like the advanced students or the people that are peers like you, it's like there's this playful thing that happens, and we get to share this discovery of the energy, or the sort of playing with the energy. And in this title that Arroyo has for his book, so Experiment and Experience, is like, that is really the heart of it, right? Like you get to a certain point where you say, what if?
Exactly. And accumulated experience from talking to clients. I don't think there is any better way to grow your astrology than applying it in a consultation. Now, I don't do readings. I do consults, meaning it's a conversation. And I had just a few clients in the last 2 years who I didn't realize wanted a reading, and instead they got a consult and they complained, you asked me questions. How dare you ask me questions? I don't want to answer questions. I want you to tell me my chart. And I went, oh, well, apparently we didn't communicate well because you didn't understand what I do.
Right. Yeah. I always like to check in with people when they use the word reading, because it's a red flag to me. It feels like this association with the divinatory aspects that tend to get derided in popular culture.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like the consult can be a lot of other things besides whatever a reading is,
Yes. A reading would be more like a one-way conversation. I will perform for you. A consult is a conversation where, to me, one of the first things we have to do is understand how the person is living their chart. And people will say to me in consultation sometimes, if they're new to astrology or if they've done astrology by Google search, they'll say, does my chart say I'll ever get married?
Yeah.
Or how long does my chart say I will live? And those are red flag questions to me. And I say, well, what do you want? Well, I want to get married. Okay, your chart says you'll get married. That's a joke. But does my chart say? So then we have to clear up, at least my opinion about the horoscope is you get to choose what level you live your chart. Or, I call it the spectrum of expression. Noel and I had many conversations about that. Are you going to live it at the highest level? Or are you going to sit on your couch and eat Cheetos all day?
Hey, there's nothing wrong with eating Cheetos all day.
I know. I know.
I hear my own red flag when I think about high and low and the ways that sometimes when we're talking about, the symbols can express on their highest or maybe more base level. And it's like, what does that actually mean? And can we assume there's a common interpretation of that definition of whatever is higher or lower?
A better way maybe is the shadow side.
Okay.
Or a more positive side. But I agree with you. And I'm at the age right now, and especially with some of the cycles I'm going through, I question everything. I question, did we all make this up? I mean, did the ancients start this process and then we believed it? And then through thought energy, we created a thought vortex. And, it's like in quantum physics, quantum entanglement, because we have observed it, it's real. I asked a question once in a lecture, and I really made a couple people really mad. I said, what if you were never told that Pluto cycles can be intense? What if you were never told any of the negative things about Pluto? What if instead you were told Pluto brings about abundance and joy, and Pluto brings about incredible happy power? What if that's all you were told? Would you manifest that?
Mm-hmm.
And people stood up and went, that's ridiculous. Pluto is Pluto. And I said, yeah, but what if I wasn't told any negatives? I mean, it's quite possible I would manifest the more positive or the more happy version of a Pluto cycle.
Right. Yeah.
It's very real. I mean, you think about prediction. Well, when you make a prediction and somebody believes it, and you plant it in their mind, they start looking through the lens of that perspective at life. And they will view life a little differently, and they will help to make the prediction come true sometimes. Simply because of their perspective, because you planted the idea.
Yeah.
I mean, that is so powerful to think about, right?
Well, also, or do it, when you pop the hood of the chart and you're looking into the future, whatever you get back, you're either going to lean into, like you just said, but the alternative would be to actively avoid that because you now know that there's this potential expression. So you say, well, it won't, not that, right?
Yes.
Which becomes a different level of fulfillment, because if you had no concept of whatever it might be, then it would channel towards a certain expression. But if you're rebellious enough to be like, well, I'll prove my astrologer wrong, it's not going to do that.
Yeah. The ethics of talking about the future with a client is something very powerful to think about and embrace and to honor. How do you present these future cycles? How do you communicate that to the client? What are you implanting in their mind? Because most of the time, when clients contact me for a consultation, they're in a vulnerable place. It's not because life is going perfectly. It's because there's tension. There's developmental tension. They're making big decisions. They're confused. They're changing course. Course corrections happen. So they're calling from a place where sometimes there's some vulnerability. And so our mindfulness of how we say something, how we communicate is so important. And, we don't want to be afraid, but we want to be mindful and respectful of that.
Where do you think that current astrologers can learn more about that ethics of telling the future?
Dare I do a shameless plug of a course I teach with Kepler? I mean,
you can do whatever you wish.
Well, I mean, I didn't want to go there because it sounds like a shameless plug, but Kepler College asked me to teach their prediction practicum. And it's interesting because I have this relationship with prediction that is kind of rocky. I mean, with the concept of prediction, because I'm such a maverick, because like, don't tell me how my life's going to be. And I've received some very negative predictions from some very famous astrologers earlier in my life.
Yeah.
Honest to God. A lot of people have received negative predictions. I mean, they stick with you though. I had one astrologer early on before I started my practice professionally who said, "Oh, you're never going to get married and you're never going to have children." And I went, "What?"
That's brutal.
Yeah. And he goes, "It's in your chart, young lady. And if you can't see that, you're not studying hard enough." And, I was young. I mean, I was, maybe 19, 20 years old. Fortunately, I've always been rebellious. Fortunately, I've always challenged authority, maybe not outwardly, but inwardly. And I thought, watch me, buddy. If I want to get married, I'm going to get married. But it stuck with me. What was he looking at in my chart?
Yeah.
And then later, after I was happily married, and I've been married for 35 years to my soulmate, I believe, I was talking to somebody in 1994, and he said, "You will be divorced in a year." He saw transiting Pluto coming to my descendant. Now, did he ask me, "Are you happy in your relationship?" No. He pronounced it with great authority. And I went, "No, I'm not going to be divorced in a year." And he proceeded to berate me.
Wow.
"You are obviously very unaware." And I went, "You want to see unawareness?" Ooh, and I stopped myself and breathed because I just paid for this reading consultation.
Yeah.
I didn't have a whole lot of money at that time. So I have this relationship with prediction in how it can affect you and how should it be used and the respectfulness that is required. So I said to Kepler, I will teach this, but I want to call it the art of forecasting. And the first lesson is going to be about ethics.
Yeah.
And to me, that was very important. I know ISAR has ethical standards. I know other orgs do too. I don't know if the ethics of prediction should be rules as much as it's a heartfelt understanding of respect for the human and the choice,
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like sometimes with the plethora of the Google astrologer, right? The ability to just get astrological information through various search engines and have it in front of you, a conversation around ethics with the professional community or the incoming professionals or the people who might want to be professionals one day seems to be a little bit lacking in the balance of things.
Yeah. Well, at the ISAR conference, that was August of 2022, I gave a lecture on anxiety signatures in the horoscope, which you have to be very careful when you give a lecture like that because, as newbies in astrology, we are just looking for cookbook answers. And that's not a criticism. That's true. When we first begin, there's so much information. We haven't digested it. We don't have wisdom yet necessarily. So we look for cookbook stuff. This equals that. This means that. So I spent the good first 10 minutes of that lecture saying, I'm going to show you where some people may have the wiring for this, but that doesn't mean if this shows up in the chart, they have anxiety. And we can't say that. And I was very, very careful about that and needed to explain that. And a lot of people came up to me afterwards because I talked about how, in a consultation, if I see this, I might say to the client, does anxiety play a role in your life? Which I think is a very respectful way. Or if it seems very obvious, I'll say, what role does anxiety play in your life? 2 ways to ask the same question. And if they say, it used to dominate my life, but I've learned how to manage it. That's beautiful. It shows evolution of the person, right?
Yeah.
But you don't go, you have anxiety or there's anxiety in this chart. Why would you want to do that? But people came up to me after the lecture and said, oh my God, I needed to hear that. I needed to hear how to talk to a client in a consultation that opened those doors to being respectful. And I thought, ooh, it's not being talked about enough.
Yeah. Well, thank you for holding space for that and transmitting that concern around ethics. I think it's a brilliant reminder and something that's definitely a need in the community. So I appreciate that. If you were going to bring someone into astrology by way of a book, do you have any books you would get them to read or any other approaches that you might give them?
It's interesting that you ask that because I get a lot of people who say, what's a good beginner book? And I don't know why I blank out. I cannot come up with a good beginner book. And it might be because of how I learned astrology, which was kind of remembering and learning at the end. It was so long ago. So I don't know, but I frequently will say Astrology University or Kepler College, go to their foundational level courses. You're good.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how to answer that question.
That's a wonderful answer too. Take a class is like, hey, don't get a book, take a class. Because, there is something about the oral transmission that isn't quite the same as book learning.
Yeah. But please don't Google search. The first question I ask clients now, if it's a new client, is, have you studied astrology? And the answer to that question is fascinating right now. It used to be different 10 years ago, but now people will go, oh, yes, I have my chart and I Googled every single planet and I've studied it. Like, so can you read the chart? Well, I have all the little meanings for everything, and what happens is then they take one thing and they expand it and it's not synthesized with the rest of the chart, but they think they know astrology.
Yeah, it's a whole crop of people who came in during the pandemic years when everything was locked down. I've noticed that when I ask my clients a similar question, I'll say, how much astrology do you speak? Mm-hmm. They'll self-identify as beginning to learn during the pandemic and listening to podcasts and watching different things on YouTube and such. So it's like a whole new generation got born during that time.
Yeah. And astrology by Google search lacks wisdom and depth and cohesive energy. One of the things I do in a consult is I don't use jargon. It was one of Noel's things. I wasn't using jargon even before I met Noel. So when he said, don't use jargon, I went, oh my God, we're friends, What
a relief.
Yeah. And what happens when you don't use jargon and you're synthesizing many things into sometimes the most beautiful sentence, then the client, if they're a Google search client, will go, where did you see that in my chart? And there are many times it's like, oh my God, I don't know where I saw it. I saw it in 20 different places and I just put it all together.
And I translated astrology into English for you. This is what you're paying for.
That's right. And it was a great sentence.
Yeah.
It was beautiful.
No, I love that challenge of trying to get the astrological concepts into plain language because that becomes poetry in a way. It has to.
Yes. Unless the client wants, tell me house by house where my planets are and tell me what they mean. And I'll go, I have to refer you to somebody else because that bores me to tears. Or take a class. If you want a class, that's very different than a consult.
Yeah, very, very true.
Yeah.
All right. Well, where can people find you?
My website, roseastrology.com. And, I do a lot on Facebook. Mm-hmm. My YouTube channel, Rose Astrology, is available.
Awesome. And the Maverick Astrology Podcast is available on your YouTube channel?
It is. And on most streaming, I'm overdue for another episode. I need to do that.
Okay. I love the purple chair graphic that you have for your podcast on YouTube. So if you haven't seen it, guys, to go to Kathy's YouTube channel and look it up. It's really cool. Like, I want that here at CAELi. I want to sit on that, but it needs to be teal.
Oh, awesome.
Kathy, it's so great to finally have a long conversation with you and explore everything that goes on in your world of astrology and just to appreciate your take. So thank you for sharing your mind and heart with us today.
Thank you for inviting me, and it's been my pleasure. And you're doing wonderful, wonderful work for the community, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library, or to become a member, visit our website at caeli.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.